The Ocean Ranger disaster was one of the worst offshore disasters in Canadian history. How many of you are familiar? Okay. On February 14th, 15th, 1982, the semi-submersible drilling rig, the Ocean Ranger, sank during a severe winter storm on the Grand Banks, around 170 nautical miles east of St. John's, Newfoundland. All 84 people on board died. The Ocean Ranger, the drilling rig, on the morning of February 14th, received a forecast warning of a major winter storm with winds around 90 knots, which is about 167 kilometers per hour, and waves potentially reaching 37 feet. As the day went on, the storm intensified dramatically. Environment Canada's later analysis described winds in the Hibernia area approaching 80 knots with much higher gusts and seas reaching 43 feet or more. Other analyses and observations put some individual waves considerably higher. What makes the story particularly frightening is that the Ocean Ranger wasn't simply caught unexpectedly. The crew knew the storm was coming and prepared the rig for it. They stopped drilling and disconnected from the well so the rig could ride out the storm. And then around 7:45, 8 p.m., a huge wave struck the rig. It smashed a porthole in the ballast control room that allowed seawater to pour into the room. Salt water reached the electrical ballast control console, causing the whole system to malfunction. The rig developed a list. It shifted toward the port side. The crew struggled to manually operate the ballast system and stabilize the rig. Water eventually flooded parts of the rig, and the Ocean Ranger capsized and sank at about 3:10 a.m. Rescue attempts were severely hampered by the enormous seas, darkness and wind, and freezing temperatures, and only 22 bodies were recovered. My grandfather, Joseph Clayton Burry, was one of the last bodies to be recovered. Coming from Newfoundland, growing up with the Atlantic Ocean on my doorstep, and given my family history, I grew up with a healthy respect for the ocean and for other large bodies of water. I grew up playing on the beach with my friends. We were always warned to be careful, though still allowed to go unsupervised. And when announcing that we were headed to the beach to play, we were inevitably cautioned by someone's grandmother, "Don't tease the waves." As though there was an innate understanding that the water, though beautiful, was both powerful and temperamental. Which leads us to our gospel lesson today. As a storm at sea, or in a large body of water, as in the Sea of Galilee, is no joke. But before we talk about this story at all, I'd like us to look at where it is in Mark's gospel, because that's just as important as the story itself, and it might make us read it a little differently. In the parables before this story, we hear the story about the mustard seed and the non-anxious farmer. Jesus told the story about the sower who, when flinging his seeds, found that some had fallen on good soil, some on rocks, and others on hard soil. In all three of these parables, Jesus is sharing possibilities for the realm of God, but that for now, the realm of God is coming only in soft whispers and tiny beginnings. Jesus was preaching to his hometown crew throughout Galilee and gathered a quite impressive following. If we were to go look at Mark 3, verse 9, it tells us that the crowds of people were so big that Jesus has his disciples prepare a boat so that he will not be crushed while teaching. For most of chapter 4, Mark, the storyteller, has Jesus in his boat, preaching from it like a pulpit to the congregation safely at a distance on the shore as a sort of biblical means of crowd control. And then it's evening. Jesus and the disciples leave the shore in the same boat and set sail for Gentile lands. But there, in these lands, Mark tells us Jesus will surprisingly heal an unclean, unreligious, demon-possessed foreigner. He raises a little girl from the dead and heals a woman who's been hemorrhaging for 12 years. And these experiences are followed by the feeding of the 5,000 and his walking on water. The movement of Jesus and his message of the compassionate love of God all across major geographic, cultural, and religious boundaries floods this story. A stark contrast to what some are claiming to be gospel to justify atrocious acts against others in this world. But today's reading invites us into the boat. On their way to Gentile lands, and there's a storm brewing. A great windstorm arose and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already filled with water. And Jesus, we are told, slept right through it. The disciples rushed to the stern, asking one of the most relatable questions of faith. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Rabbi, we are dying here. God, where are you? We need you. Was there ever a time in the midst of your own storm, while the chaos swirled around you or swelled up within your soul, that you cried out for a God that surely must be sleeping? One focal point of this story is the power of Jesus over all creation. And the writer of Mark's gospel here echoes the story of Jonah, where Jonah is woken and called on to pray so his ship might be saved. But the writer breaks this parallel between the two stories. The writer wants to present Jesus as even greater than a prophet, and also as one who follows God instead of bailing, instead of jumping ship. So instead of praying, Jesus rebukes the storm and commands the wind and the waves to be silent. A calm emerges. For the writer and receivers of this story, it's intended to demonstrate Jesus' control over the chaotic elements that threaten the disciples. Both Jesus' authority, which comes from God, and his willingness to take action raises questions about how we are to put our trust in and follow Jesus. The story was originally written for a church enduring stress, tribulation, and even persecution, intending to provide a comforting reminder that the gospel of Jesus rules over the church and all of creation. In the same way, the story from Mark can provide comfort to us during our own storms, or as the church moves toward a changing world with uncertain times. Often we can feel overwhelmed by the pressure, the demands, and the conflicts within our church and the world. One African prayer says it all, translating into English as, "God, protect me, for the ocean is so big and my boat is so small." What is most fascinating and terrifying when we reflect on the life, work, and teachings of Jesus is when he says to his disciples, his words echoing to us throughout the eons, "Those who believe in me will do the same works I do, and greater works than these." Smooth seas don't make for skilled sailors. And we have been given the task to show the love of God in this world and do even greater works of compassion and liberation than the one we're called to follow. How do we even begin to do this thing? Even right now, when, needless to say, the mighty wind and waves of the storm that the disciples encounter on this voyage can absolutely represent the challenges we face when we are called to minister in a world where governments of privileged countries dehumanize those created and loved by God and induce irreparable damage and trauma to the most innocent and the most vulnerable. In a world where history repeats itself over and over and over again. As followers of Jesus, we cannot gather together on Sundays and say, overall, things are better than they once were. Let's just focus on the positive. Let's not get political. Let's let that group just sort its own stuff out. Those are Gentile problems. Because the one we follow didn't only focus on what was good. The one we follow got down and dirty, wrestling with the politics of his day. The one we follow got in a boat, crossed boundaries of culture and religion, politics and pride, and demonstrated the healing and liberating power of God to those the rest of the world decided were unclean. And when the storm came, he did not offer thoughts and prayers. He rebuked the wind and claimed the power of love over the power of fear. That is the one that we follow. Sometimes God calms the storm, and sometimes God calms the sailor. And a calm sailor can breathe deeply and take action and weather the storm, knowing and trusting that their God is not sleeping. May we come to know our God is not asleep. May we be called to know the one we follow has shown us the way. Amen.